Welcome back. In this half of the show, we're going to look at solutions beyond a bailout, because it's all well and good, as Barack Obama said, to put the fire out and then figure out what caused it. But the real key is going to be stopping that fire from igniting again. Still with us, our guests in Connecticut, Peter Schiff; in London, David Buick; and in New York, Anne Lee. Back to Connecticut and Peter Schiff. There's kind of two groups I want to hold to account, if you like, in this half of the show. The banks themselves, and again, looking at it at a real consumer level, the banks and then the consumers themselves. Let's look at the banks first. Do they need to be really pulled into line over their practices, if you like? And I'm talking about, again, consumer level, the way they practice, the way they lend their money, their credit cards.
Well, that's all going to stop. I mean, the free market is going to function. You know, we're not in this mess because of a lack of regulation. The government did this. It was the Federal Reserve that kept interest rates much too low. It was our tax code that encourages more borrowing. It was the moral hazards of Freddie and Fannie that allowed trillions of dollars of mortgages to be insured. This is a creation of government, and the free market can sort this out. It's not going to sort it out in a way that's going to be painless, and the politicians don't like it, but we can't try to prevent it. You know, the government can't bail anybody out. The government is broke. Who's going to bail out the government? And, you know, we're looking for the rest of the world to loan us money. Your other guest mentioned China and the fact that they have to keep loaning to us. No, they don't. I mean, we owe the Chinese a lot of money, but we're never going to pay that money back. And the more money the Chinese lend us, the more money they're going to lose. What they have to do is cut us off. And the flip side for China, sure, when they cut us off and let the dollar collapse, they're going to lose a lot of money on their U.S. dollar investments. Fine. But what's going to happen to the value of the RMB? It's going to go through the roof. I think the Chinese currency could increase fivefold, maybe more, and that's going to create huge domestic demand in China. It's going to lift the value of wages and savings of every person who lives in China, and they're going to see a boom in their economy as their standard of living rises.
Okay,
and instead of producing goods and shipping them to America, they'll produce goods and consume them themselves.
Good points you make there, but if I can, I'm just trying to bring this back again to the idea of looking at the banks. I really want to try to help viewers to understand the situation that they're in. Again, the banks themselves who lend to...
A lot of banks are going to fail. They made bad loans.
Exactly, but what about...
They've got to fail. The government can't stop it.
Okay, then I want to go to David Buick in London, if I can, just to, again, continue this thread. The banks there, I'm going to talk from personal experience, if I can, a little anecdote. When I moved to London some years ago, and I saw so much lending, it was so easy to get a credit card. Credit was easily available, and people were pretty much living outside their means. Is there got to be some responsibility taken there from the banks?
Well, we've had a reality check, I can assure you, in the last 3 or 4 months. It's virtually impossible now to get increased credit on credit cards, and I have no issue with that. It's not possible to get a mortgage unless you're going to put down 25% of the value of the house, and very few people are in a position to do that unless they're trading up. And that, of course, in the last 6 months or so has proved very difficult, if not nigh on impossible, to actually do. And the controls and the discrimination against debt is significantly more stringent. But I keep harping back to the old problem, is that until such time as the liquidity, personally speaking, in the next 6 months, even though I'm close to retirement, I don't care about the equity market if it goes down the pan. I don't care about the bond market. I don't care about the foreign exchange market. I care about life and I care about people. And what I'm saying is that without banks being relatively solid and in a position to be able to give us the facilities that we need to live, we've got absolutely nothing. Now, my point is against Peters is, I hear him, I understand capital, can I just finish this very quickly, is we have to have a vehicle to tip this toxic waste in. I think that toxic waste has value in 2 to 5 years. Bricks and mortar don't suddenly become worth nothing.
We have a vehicle,
in the meantime,
it's called the free market.
Well, it's okay, but I'm trying to find a pragmatic solution. I mean, there are many, as I understand it in the United States of America, hang on, 80% of the people agree with you, Peter. I'm just saying there are other countries around the world that have got a say in this, and they want to get themselves out of this jam quickly.
Peter Schiff.
Stop lending us money. That's the best way out of it. You know, if the world wants to solve its problems, stop lending Americans money. We're never going to pay it back. We're exporting inflation all around the world. We're responsible for global monetary policy that is creating all this inflation. There's no solution that involves propping up the U.S. economy. That is the problem. Now, you're talking about the housing market. The solution to the housing market is lower home prices. People can't afford to buy these homes. That's the problem. If prices collapse, then people can come up with a down payment. But the government is trying to interfere with the market solution because it doesn't like it. The government wants to maintain artificially high home prices, and that leads to disaster.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, there was another group which I felt maybe perhaps needed to be held to account slightly, and that is the consumer themselves. Peter Schiff over there in Connecticut, is this the crisis which is going to make people actually sit up and realise they've been living beyond their means, they've been living on credit, and it quite simply has to stop now?
Well, absolutely. You know, the problem is we never should have had consumer credit in the first place. You shouldn't borrow money to consume, because when you do that, you have no mechanism for paying back the money. Borrowing should be reserved for businesses who are making capital investments, because then when you buy a piece of equipment, you produce a factory, you can generate a revenue stream to retire the debt. And so the consumer credit in this country is coming to an end. You know, the solution to high home prices, for example, is to allow home prices to collapse. Then people won't have to borrow as much money to buy them. But, you know, the government doesn't like the market solution. You know, your other guest mentioned that we need a mechanism for correcting these imbalances. We have a mechanism. It's called the free market. It's called capitalism. It works. But, you know, there's going to be some pain. But just because medicine doesn't taste good doesn't mean we shouldn't swallow it. See, unfortunately, the public wants to believe that the government can save us, that there's something the government can do to ease the pain. There's nothing they can do. You know, that's how we got into the Great Depression. The government constantly tried to interfere with the free market, and they created that crisis. They're going to do something worse this time, because if they try to replace all the savings with a printing press, they're going to destroy our economy, because they're going to destroy our money. And we're going to have a much greater crisis if that happens. So we need to level with the American public, let them know that what we're seeing now is just the natural consequences of all the extravagances of the past. And we've been led to this by our government, which encouraged us to borrow and consume every step of the way. Every time we whipped out our credit cards and bought another imported product that we couldn't afford, our phony GDP numbers went up. And we said this was great.
Okay, let me ask Anne Lee.
We're sowing the seeds of our own destruction.
Let me ask Anne Lee in New York for her perspective. You are, of course, there in New York, but also an expert on Asian markets. I'm interested to know what consumer habits are in other parts of the world. Peter Schiff has told us all about this extravagance and this excess. What's it like, for example, in parts of Asia? Is there that reliance on credits and loans?
Well, I'll use China as an example.
Sure.
The consumers there save at least 30% of what they earn. And they do this because they don't have the same kind of safety nets that we have in the United States. So as a result, they have the ability to be making a lot of purchases. The credit card industry has been trying to break into the Chinese market for some time now and have been unsuccessful, because the Chinese mentality is to only spend what you can pay for. And it's a very different culture, and that's something that maybe the Americans need to learn. But I want to make two other points in response to what your other guests have said. Regarding what the government can do, I agree with most of what Peter had said about letting things go to their natural level, because asset prices have been tremendously inflated. And to prop that up is very irresponsible of the government. However, I think what the government can do to help this economy is to funnel those resources, instead of bailing out rich investors and bankers who are reckless in creating this credit mess in the first place, to put that money into investment programs, such as investing in science and technology and developing new products, something that the world will need, which is, you know, technology to eliminate pollution, you know, green technology, maybe biotechnology to help produce more food in a safe way. I mean, these are real things, real products. This is where America can add value because we have a lot of brilliant people in this country, and we need to harness that talent.
Ms. Lee, I'm going to just interrupt you. I'm so sorry, because we are really running short on time. I just want to get a final word from David Buick. Just because Anne Lee said something which really struck with me. The words she said, there is a culture there in China of spending what you can pay for, and that is in many ways the crux of this whole problem. Do you think that mentality in places like Britain, in the US, it can change and that people can get onto this idea of only spending what they have?
I think it's laudable. I'm hugely envious of it. Take 10 years. Very quickly on Peter's point, the toy's broken. What he said, I agree with again with about 75% with what he said. We've lived, beyond our means. We borrowed far too much. But I'm older than God, and I had a mortgage for 25 years, and I paid an average of 12% during that period. I paid it off. I haven't saved any money, but I've paid it off. And we need to get back to that mentality and concentrate the bank's efforts on lending money to industry and commerce. All I'm saying is the toy's broken. I want it mended.
Great points from all of our guests here today on Inside Story. Peter Schiff in Connecticut, David Buick in London, and Anne Lee in New York. Thanks so much for your time, and thank you, our viewer, for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. Your comments, your suggestions, send them to us, insidestory@aljazeera.net. From the whole team, goodbye for now.